This is CNN Breaking News.
I'm Brianna Keeler in the Situation Room. Wolf Blitzer is on assignment, and we are following a lot of breaking news in Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. Tonight, prosecutors are revealing for the first time that they have evidence that Trump ally Roger Stone communicated with WikiLeaks. This, as a federal judge just put a gag order on Stone and lawyers involved in his criminal case. Also breaking, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders has been interviewed by the special counsel's office in a story that was first reported exclusively by CNN. I want to bring in Pamela Brown, our senior White House correspondent. We have Justice reporter Shimon Prokupecz and CNN national security and legal analyst Susan Hennessy. Tell us what you're learning, Pam.
Well, Brianna, we're learning the prosecutors are saying for the first time today that they have direct evidence of Roger Stone communicating with WikiLeaks. This is according to a new court filing from special counsel prosecutors. And the prosecutors had to show the case against basically how the case of the Russians hacking the DNC and the Stone case are related. So the way they did that is they executed multiple search warrants that showed up this information on several accounts that showed that Roger Stone was in fact in touch with Guccifer 2.0, believed to be Russian intelligence, and WikiLeaks. Now, it's unclear what those communications entailed, but previously prosecutors had said that he was seeking to reach Julian Assange through intermediaries to find out what the Russians had and whether it would help the Trump campaign. So this certainly, Brianna, raises a lot of questions because, again, in the Roger Stone indictment, it just alluded to the fact he was trying to get in touch with WikiLeaks, not that there was this direct evidence. Of course, he was charged with lying, not conspiracy. So certainly this raises a lot of questions, though, about what those communications were about, why this is just being revealed now.
And how significant is this in your evaluation, Susan?
I think potentially it is quite significant. So Roger Stone has always sort of been in this nebulous space. And then the big million-dollar question here is there a direct line or a line that we can trace between the Trump campaign, the Trump organization, people actually within the president's orbit, and this Russian plot? Robert Mueller has really laid out quite convincingly what exactly the Russians engaged in. And Roger Stone, by virtue of his own public comments at the time, right, that John Podesta was going to have his time in the barrel, essentially correctly predicting the future, really did raise the specter that he knew this non-public information that turned out to be true in advance. And so one of the interesting things here is not just how close is Stone's ties to WikiLeaks or to Assange personally, but also what was the nature of his communication with the president or with the Trump campaign? Those are both big unanswered questions of essentially what role did he play here, and was he potentially a go-between or a pass-through that communicated relevant information?
And really, one of the things that would make this most significant, certainly, that if Roger Stone had any kind of knowledge or was any way directing or working with WikiLeaks and telling them, you know, post this, I need you guys to do this on this date, I need you to do this, tell me what more you have. If he was in any way coordinating with them, it's going to change the entire game, primarily because then he had knowledge of what they were doing, how they were obtaining these emails and other information. One of the things in the documents that I found really interesting was that the government, in explaining these search warrants, they say that they obtained and executed dozens of search warrants on various accounts used to facilitate the transfer of stolen documents for release, as well as to discuss the timing and promotion of their release. So clearly, I mean, they have a lot of information. They're talking about dozens of subpoenas here, perhaps search warrants on servers, on emails. So there is a lot more that they're still not telling us about communications, perhaps, between WikiLeaks, Russians, perhaps, others involved in this entire investigation.
Why would Roger Stone lie about that contact? And I know this is a hard question to answer because you're not Roger Stone. But why would he lie knowing the resources that Robert Mueller has to check things? I mean, if you've sent an email, if you've been in touch, there's record of it, and he's lied about it, and he's been caught.
He has. I mean, remember, some of them were text messages. I mean, he wasn't going to great lengths to cover up his communications because we know that from the indictment. So it does raise the question of why is he lying about it? Of course, you would think that he would think it's going to be uncovered by prosecutors. So it is just this fundamental question. Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, why did they lie? But what really sticks out to me about this is let's not forget that in the Roger Stone indictment, it said a senior campaign official directed someone else to get in touch with Roger Stone about what WikiLeaks had. Now, it didn't include this information, though, that he actually did make direct contact with WikiLeaks. So it certainly raises that extra question of like, okay, well, who else in the campaign was then aware of these communications and what they were talking about?
Because prior to this, we only knew that Roger Stone was in touch with
intermediaries.
Intermediaries,
right? Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's how the special counsel, in the charges, certainly that's how they made it seem. Other information indicated that it was intermediaries.
You said if the important distinction would be if he was directing, guiding the release. What if he was just receiving guidance about when things were going to happen?
That's probably a fair legal question.
What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, look, we want to be careful because Roger Stone has, of course, not been charged for sort of underlying conduct here. He's only been charged with lying. But the reason why it's potentially of interest to investigators is because the way the laws of conspiracy work, in order to conspire to commit a larger crime, you don't have to be involved in every single part of it. You have to know that the conspiracy is taking place, that this larger criminal scheme is being conducted. You have to take substantial steps, and even if your piece of that is potentially a small piece, something like organizing the distribution of hacked materials, directing the hacking of that types of materials, and again, this is not what Stone has been substantively accused of at this point. That is all stuff that could indicate that down the road, prosecutors might be interested not just in looking in charging someone like Roger Stone. Also remember Jerome Corsi, that sort of draft plea agreement sort of still hanging out there. He still hasn't been charged. The reason why this might be of interest to prosecutors is because it might indicate that they're making the step towards something like a conspiracy charge.
Okay, so my point, my question then is, if they have some sort of proof, which we don't know because we're waiting to see where these dots are connected, if they have some proof that he was involved in a conspiracy or that he has knowledge of it, would there be a reason at this point in time to not charge him with that? Because it's only lying and other subsequent charges.
Right, so the big reason is, one, whether or not they're prepared to make that case public, and whether or not there are other individuals, other potential targets here that they aren't yet prepared to tip their hands.
You have to keep in mind that, and the special counsel's office has said this, and the FBI has said this, and the intelligence officials, that they are still working operations. They are still working investigations because the Russians are continuing to still want to hack and interfere in our election. So there could be elements of this that they do not want to reveal because it could reveal sources and methods.
And our report is about Assange, right? That there is a case under
there is
wraps
a case,
with Julian Assange.
And so there could be that. That case is out of the Eastern District of Virginia. It's not a special counsel's office case, but they could be merging everything together. And that's why, when I was making the point earlier that no matter what happens here, the special counsel stays, goes away, this investigation is going to live on well beyond the special counsel's office, and that's going to be significant. And just one point that I want to make about why lie. I think what was going on here is that politically, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Michael Flynn, all of these guys, they knew that they had to stick to one story because politically it was going to be too damaging for the president. And in the end, Michael Cohen, what we saw is time and time again, is all of these guys trying to protect the president in the end. They were doing all sorts of shady things, doing all sorts of shenanigans that were going on during the campaign. They did not want to admit to it. And every time the FBI would confront them, they would lie. When they went before Congress, they would lie. Because ultimately, I do think that whether there's collusion or no collusion, politically, this was always going to be a problem for the president. And what they wanted to do was protect him.
At the very least, right?
At the very least.
Look, another thing to keep in mind whenever we're looking at the indictments that are starting to get closer and closer to actual Russian activities, people outside the United States, that's an area in which it's not just a criminal investigation. It's also a counterintelligence investigation and national security investigation. And those are contexts in which the government isn't always thinking just about filing charges, right? They're thinking about long-term protection, not just of sources of methods, but also of countering those efforts into the future. And so this really is an area in which we see the extent to which this investigation really is informed by large, long-term national security concerns and issues. It's one area in which we might get less information, even if there ultimately is something like a public Mueller report. This is the type of stuff that the government traditionally really does not like to produce.
And Pam, you'll remember this because when we were doing all of this reporting early on in this investigation, kept hitting roadblocks because of the counterintelligence investigation. You know, sources were very reluctant to talk about some of the information because they were dealing really with what they deemed to be a national security threat. You know, we had Russians who were trying to interfere in the election, they were trying to hurt us, and they are continuing to do it. And I think for the FBI and for the Department of Justice, that's what has complicated this entire investigation, that they have information. How do you handle it? It's sensitive. What do we do?